Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Virtual Executive Director Podcast. My name is Becky Caldwell, and I'm your host. I'm an executive coach for mission and purpose-driven leaders, and I serve as the actual executive director of the Virginia Highlands Festival in Abingdon, Virginia. I am taking a few weeks off from actively producing the podcast so that I can accept this gift of time and pause and reimagine what this podcast could be, what it can offer to you, our audience. So I invite you to take the same gift of pause. And if you would like to get in touch with me directly and work with me as your coach right now, feel free to email me, becky@virtualexecutivedirector.com, or reach out to me on any of the social media platforms that are linked in the show notes. And let's have an initial conversation, because so much is possible right now, even amidst all the restrictions. So you just need to take that time to accept it and even maybe seek what those gifts might be. And I can help you with that. So while I'm pausing the podcast, I'm going to rerun some of my favorites. It's not going off the air completely. Or should I say off the internet completely? I'm going to rerun some of my favorites that I think will help get you in this spirit of acceptance and exploration. So without further delay, here is the episode for this week. This week's summer rerun is an interview I recorded back in January with my friend Jonathan Pitts, and we talk about the concepts of inclusion and belonging as it relates to our organizations and businesses. And I can't believe that this is even more relevant right now than it was just 6 months ago. Although, I mean, I guess I can believe it because I live in the United States. And okay, long story short, I'm going to need a new hairdresser because it turns out mine is a racist. Let me explain. And I'm going to give you some language that you might enjoy using because there are still people out there who we have to deal with who don't understand and are like, I just don't understand why the looting, that's not helpful, or why is everyone getting so violent? And what I said to my hairdresser is, well, perhaps it is 400 years of repression followed by the heavy restrictions of COVID-19 and more Black people getting killed for no reason by the police. So I said that out loud to her. Another take that I have seen that seems to be effective is when people say, it's so horrible that Black people are being killed by the police. Like, it's horrible that George Floyd died, but I just don't understand that that the destruction of property and the violent protests is just it's inexcusable. What if you flip that around and you say, I know the destruction of property and violent protests are difficult, but the killing of an unarmed Black man for no reason is inexcusable. Just flip it around. See how it goes. Yeah. Let's get on with the show. I'm really, really excited to bring onto the podcast one of my very best friends in the world, Jonathan Pitts. Jonathan and I met when I worked for him as an associate producer for the Chicago Improv Festival, and he has since retired from Chicago Improv Productions to go on a global improv walkabout. How awesome of a life would that be? So he is traveling the world teaching and performing improv. And so I wanted to talk with him about this idea of inclusion because he has this global perspective. And I thought at the beginning of our conversation, I thought that improv had maybe a leg up on every other, I don't know, like thing out there when it comes to inclusion, because the first rule of improv is acceptance. Yes, and yes, I accept you, and I add something to the conversation. Well, you'll hear how that turned out in the episode. And the other thing I want to bring up before I launch into the interview is that I kind of have my own idea or my own take on inclusion, because I believe, and by the way, this is not based on any empirical evidence at all. This is just my thought, but I do believe that those of us who work in nonprofit and in mission-driven businesses, we're not purposely exclusive. We are, we're just bad at letting people know that we want them with us, people who are different from us in whatever way that might be. And so I look at it more as creating a sense of belonging with my organization, because you were never excluded from what we do. We just were really, really bad at inviting you in. It's not like I have to scoot over and make a place at the table for you. There was always a place next to me at the table. I was just a really bad host and didn't let you know that. So that's kind of an idea that I'm sort of playing around with right now. And I don't know, maybe I'm full of crap, and you can feel free to call me on that. I welcome any thoughts on this idea of inclusion and belonging. Okay, let's get this conversation started. Jonathan, I'm so glad you're here.
Yay.
Yes.
So, do we start now on this, or was that still just a setup? I didn't want to start if there was more of a setup. I was like, Becky's so good at this. I don't want to ruin her setup.
Oh, no, you're good. You're good. Everything is great. Whatever we say is exactly what should be said. So I'm not worried about it.
Before I get to what I've done the last 2 years on my Global Improv Walkabout, and for anybody who's listening, the last 2 years I've taught and performed in 24 countries and 49 cities. That's like in Europe and Oceania and Asia. I've not yet been to South America or Africa, but those are the 3 continents that I've been to. Now, prior to that, part of what I learned about what is called as inclusionary goes all the way decades back prior to that, when I was the theater and performance curator for the Around the Coyote Arts Organization. And at the time that I did that, the Around the Coyote had a pretty bad reputation as being a tool of real estate developers and in terms of gentrifying the Wicker Park area. Mm. And, so when I took it over, I got invited to do that position. And I was like, I knew that's what the reputation was. And I'm like, what can I do to counter that, to do and bring in interesting work? Now, prior to doing that, I would have to go all the way back to when I was a production intern for the International Theater Festival of Chicago. Because that was my first experience working with artists from around the world. And that's sort of when I fell in love with festivals, and that's when I fell in love with working with international work and international artists, and seeing all the different ways there are to create creations and different ways to create theater. And then that led to later on, like I said, me getting invited to be the theater and performance art curator at the Around the Coyote. So my first year that I did it is I was going to be very inclusionary. Like that was like my goal, because if the arts organization was seen as a tool of gentrification, then that meant pushing out the residents as opposed to including the residents.
Now, can you, for a quick history lesson, talk about what What was Wicker Park, Chicago like?
It was a combination of older Polish people, Ukrainian people, Bohemian people, as well as a lot of Latino people, and then younger artists, and then some African Americans. It was a combination like that. So it was very almost like New York in the sense of being like, one of the boroughs that has a lot of different energies there. Now, personally, for me, having been on the inside of the Around the Coyote and having been to their board meetings and their arts meetings, I never thought that they were a tool or an extra organization, deep cover organization of gentrification, because they were not that good. Like you would have had to be super skilled to do that. And being in the room with them, they were not that. I was like, that's assigning, some CIA type level skills to these people that they do not have.
So it was more an inadvertent tool.
Right. And it was because it was so visible, because the Around the Coyote happened one weekend a year in the Wicker Park neighborhood. And it was created by a guy who wanted to have an art gallery and wanted to have an art area outside of like downtown and River West, which are the two sort of predominant arts places in Chicago. So he wanted people, artists that normally get seen, to be seen, because he also wanted to sell their work. And so he was creating a event for people to come, because he was from Paris and there were like arts walks there. So he created the Around the Coyote, which the Coyote is actually a building in the Wicker Park area called the Coyote Building. And the whole event kind of took around then. And what happened was a lot of artists opened up their homes or their studios for people to come see the work. And it was the act of people coming into those homes and studios that made some people go, hey, this is a really nice place. We should buy it or look at it. I mean, and so I get where that came from. But that was only one weekend a year. Whereas 51 weeks of the year, you had the Double Door and Rainbow Club and the early days of Smashing Pumpkins and Liz Fair. And that's when Chicago developed its reputation as being the big rock scene in America, separate of, following up Seattle's grunge.
Yeah.
And you had bands like Urge Overkill, and you had all these bands playing in multiple bars every weekend. And they drew in so many more Chicago people, but also so many more suburban people to come see all these things. And I feel like then those suburban people, when they graduated, wanted to live there.
Yeah.
So I feel
so
like
to lay
the
all of
rock
that at the
scene,
feet of, to lay all that on Around the Coyote was a little bit,
from my perspective.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's a lot of people, who would really strongly disagree. I mean, I get that, like, one of the board members was from a real estate place, and it did serve him to have that. And there was the thing of having people open up their homes, and then people seeing what those apartments and spaces were like that they hadn't been there before, so it gave them ideas. But to me, it was really, but those might have been the more developer side. It was a constant flow of young people who wanted to then live in this hip section.
Yeah.
That to me is what changed it.
Sure.
So when I went in, I was like, how can I make the theater and performance arts section more connected to the community that it takes place in?
And that's what inclusion and belonging, I think, means to me. How are you connecting what you're creating to where it's being created and including everybody?
Yes. Also, partially for me, I was like, I wanted to prove that such a thing could be done. I changed the submission process for Around the Coyote, and I changed the financial process, and I changed the show process. And then I also converted spaces into performance spaces. But here's the biggest lesson that I found.
Okay.
Just because you say you're inclusionary doesn't mean that message goes anywhere. I started out saying, I'm going to make this inclusionary. Come one, come all. People didn't come. Or if they did, they weren't some of the reflections of some of the people that were there. And then I realized, just because you say you're going to have a party, if you don't invite people in, they're not going to know there's a party. And just because you have a party and you send out messages on your block doesn't mean that that message is going to go anywhere else to other people on other blocks.
Mm-hmm.
So I started doing research, and I started into like, what sort of theater companies are there in Chicago that I'm not familiar with that represent different elements of different populations. And then I would reach out to the people I knew at the Latino Chicago Theater Company to find out whether Latino companies were out there. I knew some deaf people and asked them, if their theater was still going. And by the end, I had theater productions that were African American, that were Latino American, that were deaf American, that were Native Aboriginal American. Like, I didn't even know before then that there was a Native American theater company in Chicago.
Oh, wow. I didn't either.
Because they predominantly only perform for other Native Americans.
Ah.
So then I also had because the neighborhood was Polish, I had a group from Poland, a Polish group that would do an entire performance in Polish.
Oh, that's so cool.
Right? So I found that if you're going to be inclusionary, you have to actually go to where the people you want to include are and create relationships with them and invite them in.
Yes. I think that invitation is so important. That's a step that I think so many people forget about. Like, just like you said, just because you create the thing doesn't mean that the people who you are trying to include will know about it or understand why they might want to go.
Yes. And just because you're a really big theater like Steppenwolf, and you want people who are people of color or to come into your theater, doesn't mean they will or even know about you. Because there are people on African Americans on the South Side who've rarely ever been on the North Side.
Yeah.
I found that if you want to be truly inclusionary, you can't just open up your doors. You have to go be an ambassador to where the people you want to work with are and create relationships and then invite them in. Now, I was not inviting in their audiences because I was presuming that their performance at the festival would invite in their audience.
And?
Because their audiences, and yeah, it did. Because their audiences being segmented already, they would come to see, they would already have their own audience. And as a solo person by myself, I only had so much time and energy to do everything. So I thought it better to go find the theater artist that I wanted to have in there. And then I had one improv show. I didn't lean heavy on improv. I maybe had one or two, but I also had a puppet theater piece. I had storytelling. I had a performance art piece that was like performance and dance and music that was created out of sculpture. So I had a wide range of stuff. And then I also put the Polish group, the Aboriginal, the Native American group, the one particular African American group that was there, the Latino group, and the Deaf Theater Company, and I put them all in the same venue. And they each got an hour, and then I went back to back to back so that everybody would be in the same place.
And was there crossover, audience crossover then?
No.
Oh, wow.
And that's when, and also I arranged it because prior to this, the year before me, you had to pay tickets to go see groups. Which, if you're doing fringy stuff, why are you going to pay $7 to $10 for a ticket to see a show that you don't know jack shit about? When you can walk around and see art in places for free and go use your same $10 to get a drink.
Right. Still true.
So, right? So the performances were getting less and less audiences because if you didn't know them, why would you take a risk? And I got the ticket things removed. It became donation only, and not donation coming in, donation going out.
How did that go? Like financially,
Some
was that?
it became very Darwinian.
Ooh.
If your shit was good, you got money. If your shit was confusing or boring, you didn't get much money. We had, remember when I talked about the performance group that had musical instruments that they had created in a sculptural way that they played, and they also included dance?
Uh-huh.
That weekend, they made $1,000 a night.
Oh, wow.
In donations, and they got reviewed by the Chicago Tribune. Then you'd have another show that maybe made $15. But that's where it came back to sort of like an artistic Darwinianism.
Yeah.
Instead of having 7 to 10 audience members, every show was pretty close to full. And it was great to be able to have this wide representation of true inclusion because, you know, when I was meeting with these different companies, I would say to them, I don't want you to tell you what type of work I want you to present. I just want you to present the work that you want to present. Because if I'm being inclusionary, I'm not saying, hey, come to my party, but you have to bake your pie the way I like it baked. Versus saying, come to my party, bring the food you'd like to share. That's inclusionary.
Okay. I want to point out something else really quick that you said that is something that I've been teaching people about. And it's that you identified the one thing that you could do such that by doing it, everything else you needed to do as a producer would be either easier or unnecessary. And you said that one thing, you don't know, I don't think you even know you did this. But the one thing was to choose the right group to come in. And that by choosing the right group, the most talented, the most diverse, the most interesting group to come in and perform, they brought their audience, and then that created the momentum for the rest of the festival.
It created a lot of it. I also want to point out that every other group was doing a similar kind of thing, bringing in their audience as well. As I heard you say what you were saying, for some reason I had like an intuitive sort of tingly response to the word right, the right group. And that is actually, I sort of was at it very differently. I didn't care if these were the right groups or not in terms of their quality. I was interested in their demographics of where they were coming from.
Okay, so that defined right in air quotes for you. That was
yeah. Rather than, you know, because if I had a choice between 3 different Latino theater companies instead of choosing the one, I would have asked all 3 to be in there.
Mm-hmm.
Because, you know, in a fringe sort of festival where it's free, quality is whatever it is.
Yeah.
But if your goal is to be inclusionary, it's harder to be inclusionary when you're focused on the concept of excellence.
Mm-hmm.
Because excellence by its own nature moves other things away and say you do not fit.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just more interested in having these voices there. I hoped that their voices would be good, but in some cases, it didn't matter. It was more that the voices were there and speaking.
Mm. Okay. So to not get so hung up on, is it the right voice? Just bring them in.
Yeah. Because sometimes, is it the right voice almost feels like, is it the white voice?
Yes.
Is it the Western canon voice?
The prevailing voice.
Yes.
Yeah.
Versus inclusion, you know, and again, in a Darwinian system where audiences can come and go whenever they want and pay whatever money they want to pay, if you're not very good at what you're presenting, you're not going to have an audience very long, and they're not going to pay you a lot of money.
Exactly.
And that's regardless of whatever skin color you have.
Yep.
Or whatever sexual or gender identity you express yourself from.
Yeah. Okay. Let's skip the Chicago Improv Productions years, because I really want to talk about what you've been doing the last couple of years.
Sure. Great.
Traveling the world.
By the way, was this helpful to have this conversation about?
Yeah. What we've done so far
I will just say I applied it towards CIF and the Chicago
Yeah.
Improv Festival. Doesn't mean we got to talk about it, but
Right.
that was part of my operating lessons behind that.
Yeah.
Which is also then when I created the College Improv Tournament, anybody who wanted to be in the tournament can be. As long as they register, they're in. Because for that, it's like education outreach. So it's its own experience. It's not a promise of a certain level of excellence. Where certain other festivals, when you are saying, come pay this ticket price for this, you are saying that there is a perceived level of excellence, and that is part of what the audience is paying for in exchange to have the experience of the art that they're about to experience.
Yeah. Well, what we've done so far is we've defined what inclusion means, and that is including the people in the community and including the community where you're creating the work. And then we talked about the mistake that you made, which was in realizing you needed to invite people. So step one is defining what it is. And step two is saying, oh, here's going out and finding them and inviting them.
Yes.
Not just assuming.
To put another button on it, before we move on to my international stuff, last year I got invited to interview for a artistic directorship for an improv organization somewhere in the United States that is in Chicago. And of course, one of the things they were very proud of was that they were very inclusionary, which at Grace is great. But I asked them, what do you guys do? Do you go there? They're like, we're very interested in LGBTQT stuff. Like, great. Do you go to where they are? Do you go to their community places? Do you put on shows in the bars? Do you go to those community centers? No, well, we just like putting them up here if they come to our place. I'm like, oh, well, then that's not very inclusionary.
Yeah.
All you're seeking is more people to come to your theater. And that will happen eventually if you go out there enough to their space. Because then you have created a relationship.
God, but if all everything is about relationships, isn't it?
To a certain degree, yeah.
Yeah.
Because, otherwise, unless, then you're just sort of counting on people who are LGBTQT to come in to your place. But why would they unless there's already a connection there of some kind? Whereas if you're like, let's go do some improv workshops in this community center with these particular audience or these particular members of the LGBTQ, and I'm sorry if I'm forgetting any of the other things with that.
IA are the last two letters, I think.
Right. Yeah, see, that's what I mean. So that if you want to be inclusionary with them, you're going to have to go to where they are to begin working with them. And, and if you want them to succeed, you're better off doing shows in the beginning in their spaces where they're going to be comfortable. Then if later on, when you have enough of a relationship with them and they have enough confidence, you can then have them come into your space.
Yes.
And they're like, no, we just want them to come do shows or see shows at our place. I'm like, oh, you're just trying to do an ass backwards version of audience development.
Yeah. And calling it inclusion. So you can get grants.
Right. Yes. That to me is part of what I think of when I think of inclusion is that you can't be inclusionary just sitting in your own home because who's going to ring the doorbell? Belonging, that goes back to relationships. Belonging comes from a comfort level within the idea of relationships. Relationships with people, places, or things. Otherwise, you're simply saying the audience member has a belonging to this experience for the length of the time of the experience. That's what they paid for. So they belong into that show, but belonging into that show may not be the actual feeling of belonging to the theater or to the organization or to the larger relationship.
Yeah.
Whereas you'll see much more of that in sports.
Yeah. People feel they belong
to
the team.
That's why That's why even though they have no say-so over the Chicago Bears, they get so upset over them. My bears. No, not your bears. You're not signing the check. But that feeling is there. You belong, here in Chicago. You're either Cubs fan or a Sox fan. North side or south side. Which side? Who do you cheer for? Where do you belong? Where's your geography? So, to me, I think that's part of where belonging comes from. It ties into relationship.
Yes. Do you feel that right now you belong to Chicago or to the rest of the world as an artist?
Right now, I feel like Chicago is where I'm from, but the world is where I'm at.
And when you go to another country and teach and perform, what helps you to feel that sense of belonging? How do you create that sense of belonging and inclusion in your workshops?
Well, first off, I sort of have to feel like I belong there in the first place before I can extend that to other people. So usually if it's a country I've never been to, that first day or two, I definitely feel like a foreigner until I get together with the improvisers or the people that have brought me there. And then it's like I find these cousins that I didn't know I had. And then at that point, it makes it easier to like, oh, this is all about improv. And then, sometimes traveling around the world, the easiest part of my day is the improv workshops or the improv shows. Because everything else can be so challenging traveling around the world that getting in and just doing improv for 4 hours or 6 hours, it's like, oh, this is easy. Going back outside and navigating the streets and trying to figure out where I'm going to go eat, that's going to be difficult.
Yeah.
So having that connection with the improvisers makes me feel no longer like a foreigner, but like somebody who's like a relative, like their cousins. And, that changes how I feel about moving through space. And then usually during the time that I'm there, they often take me to places that they like rather than me looking at the tourist spaces. So I get to see their city from their eyes. And that creates a different sense of connection. Maybe not belonging, but a sense of connection. And as soon as I meet the improvisers and there is that feeling of connection because we're all cousins, then when I go into the improv classroom, it's very easy for me to create that sense of connection with the people that I'm working with in that setting. And that's what helps creates the sense of belonging for pretty much everybody within that setting. There are some cities that I need time to get adjusted to. The first time I went to Bangalore, India, it was so vastly different than what I had previously experienced that it took me a while to ever really get a handle on it. And it was often disorientating. The second time I went to Bangalore, I was just like, oh yeah, this is Bangalore. As opposed to being so vastly disoriented. I'm like, oh yeah, it's Bangalore. That's what this is. And, when I was in Hanoi, Vietnam, it wasn't until the last day that I was there that I felt like I got a handle on it. And it's because I went to see the Hanoi Military History Museum to see both their military history prior to the Vietnam War with the United States, during and then post. And then also I went to the Vietnamese National Water Puppet Theater and saw a show.
Water puppet?
And yeah, water puppets, yes.
I need to know what that is.
I need
to know what that is. What is a water puppet?
It is done, it is puppets, a puppet show that is done in a shallow pool. And then there's a curtain, and then the puppeteers are behind it, and they operate all these puppets on very long rods, and they all swim and move through the water. The origins of it go back to the feudal days of Vietnam, when most of what they did was farming.
Mm-hmm.
So there would be times when there would be during the raining season, and a lot of the crops would be like mini lakes, and that's when they would do the water puppet show.
Wow. Okay.
And they would use the water puppets to tell folk tales and mythology and stories that people who would be agricultural based would understand.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's no words,
Oh, that's so cool.
very little words. Yeah. And I looked at it and I was like, oh my God, if I was in Vietnam in the year 700 seeing this, I would feel like I was watching magic.
Yeah. I
Because
mean,
they also have fireworks that they attach to the puppets and
oh my
all
God.
kinds of things. And they have all these musicians playing above and around them, you know.
Oh, wow.
So between both cultural experiences, I felt like all of a sudden I was like, oh, now I think I get you, Vietnam. Now I think I get you, Hanoi. And then I got comfortable. And then I went walking from the water puppet theater to the vegetarian restaurant where me and the improvisers were having a farewell party. And that was a 48-minute walk through Hanoi in the rain. But I was
Oh my
comfortable.
gosh.
They're like, you walked 48 minutes? Why don't you just grab an Uber? I was like, but I feel comfortable.
Yeah.
I know when I connect or feel comfortable with the city when I'm ready to walk in it.
Mm.
I didn't go walking in Bangalore till my second time there.
That's an interesting measurement of comfort. But I mean, it's true. I mean, you're so vulnerable when you're out walking.
Yes. Otherwise, you just take a taxi or an Uber, and or you go with the people that are driving you, and you just go from place to place.
Yeah.
But walking through another city in another country is a different relationship to that city, that country, and the people that live there.
Yeah. It's like a willingness to slow down and connect with your surroundings and with the people who are near you, like physically near you. That's really cool. That's a cool observation, Jonathan.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. So once I'm comfortable, I can then go walking in the space.
Mm-hmm.
But until then, and there are other places that, I'm like, I'm not ready yet. But once the first time I was in Prague, it was confusing because all the streets are circular due to the nature of how Prague was originally made.
Okay.
So, and unless you're in the fairy tale section where everything's like these castles, everything else all looks the same because of the Soviet era of making buildings, and everything's like the same 3-story high building. So you can't look at a neighborhood and go, I'm here in this neighborhood, because so much of everything looks the same. And then with all the streets being circular, you're just winding around the same place.
Yeah.
Or at least it feels like it, which becomes disorientating. Also, the first time I was in Prague, for whatever reason, my phone did not connect to the internet, so I didn't have GPS. So if I went walking, I literally did not know where I was.
Oh no! And walking in circles.
Yeah. The second and third time in Prague, my GPS worked, and again, I had a better sense of it. And I started going to some other neighborhoods that were not some of these sections. So then I started getting a better sense of some of the different parts of the neighborhoods. Like Tokyo. Tokyo has so many different neighborhoods, but a lot of them are very different from each other. I mean, the city itself is huge, but they have a lot of different neighborhoods or different sections of the city.
Mm-hmm. So you could tell where you were, kind of.
Yeah, but you could also spend a lot of time just walking through one section before you get and never see the other sections. So for me, my way of doing that is if I can get comfortable with the space, then first off, getting past the idea of being that I'm a foreigner or an immigrant. Not that I ever really forget it, but that I have to get past that in order to do other things. And jumping into doing improvisation with other international artists is the fastest way to it. And then the rest just comes from exposure, which, and then as far as whether or not I feel I belong in some of these cities or countries, it's different. There are some cities and countries that I prefer and feel more comfortable in. Is that a sense of belonging? Maybe. I don't know. But, there are some cities like, okay, I'm glad I saw you. I don't know if I'd come back, but I'm glad I experienced this. And in other cities like, yeah, I'd like to come back. In other cities, I'm like, oh, it'd be cool to live here for like 6 months or a year or something.
Do you think that improv is uniquely situated as an art form to create that sense of belonging?
No, because I feel like music with musicians from other parts of the world would do the same thing. Dancers would do the same thing. I think most things in the performing arts would share that similarity of being able to create that connection. I don't know if making a movie or a TV show, I guess making a movie or a TV show, because you're around the same crew and you're doing the same thing, so I probably get that. But I don't know if like you're a painter or if you're writing a book, if you get the same sort of connection with other writers and other painters. I'd have to either, especially because some of those art forms are more solitary focused.
Yeah, I would guess it's a good point though that probably any art form would be a shortcut to creating a sense of belonging.
Right.
I would say probably painting would, as if you're like a plein air, kind of outdoor painter.
Sure.
And writing, I bet authors in coffee shops all around the world recognize each other.
Right.
I see what you're doing over there.
Yeah.
How can people who are in non-artistic organizations, like, is there a way that we can kind of apply what artists already know and sort of naturally do in creating a community out of thin air?
I think that's why there's conferences. I think that's part of what the purposes of what conferences serve. You get a conferences of scientists together or a conference of social workers.
And that's where we can build those communities.
My impression of like plumbers is they all go to a conference and then just go party. More than they're like, hey, look, there's Charlie from Windsor, Ontario. Hello again. But they might be.
They might. I don't know.
So
stereotypes are a real time saver.
Right? So I would say it's the conferences that are more involved with communication rather than salesmanship that probably creates a similar kind of thing as what the arts create.
So maybe we need more conferences.
Yeah, we ought to have a conference about that.
We should. What is it about belonging that just feels so good?
Because when you have a sense of belonging, the place or the person that you belong with knows your true name.
Oh, okay. Okay. Okay.
You're like, you just opened up a whole other mountain just before we leave. I
Damn
got
it,
a nice little wrap-up thing. You just opened up an entire other journey.
Yeah. We need just a whole day of recording the two of us talking about things because
Sure.
I don't know.
Yeah. But that is my answer.
Well, all right. Can you say it again? And this time I'll try not to freak out on the mic.
What? That was lovely when you freaked out. For me, you said, what's the really great value about that sense of belonging? Is if you were with people or things, places or things that know your true name. They see you for who you really are, and they accept it. That's part of where you belong. Look at Cheers. That. Every time George Wendt came in, Norm!
Yeah.
The whole premise of Cheers is in the song in the opening. Everyone wants to go to a place where where you're welcome and they know your name. But your true name, as opposed to when you show up at a hotel and register and they go, okay, Mrs. Caldwell, thank you for being here.
The ability to live your truth and be accepted is at the core of what community is, isn't it?
Yes. And that's why it's also important when meeting other people that do not appear to be of your immediate community often being the more narrow reflection of your demographics, that when you meet them, whether it's a name that's difficult to pronounce because it's Norwegian or African or Latino or Eskimo, that you still try to hear them how they want to have their own name be. Or if they are somebody who says, I don't go by my government name, I go by this name. Or part of the purposes of the LGBTQIA in saying, this is who we are, this is my name. Being able to hear it and say it as best you can, which is why I think there's part of that whole thing happening with pronouns, because pronouns are a reflection of how you want to be seen and known by living your truth.
Just making the effort is half the connection battle, right?
Yes. You are not inclusionary just by saying anyone can come into my home if they want to. You're exclusionary when you go out to meet other people near their homes. I don't want to say in their homes because that sounds like you're going to invade their space.
Yeah.
Hey, you, I don't know you. Open up your door. I want to get to know you. Whoa.
Oh, that's such an American thing to do, though, isn't it?
It totally is, isn't it? Hey, how you doing? I'm Jonathan. I'm an American.
I'm coming to know you.
Yes. Yeah, that is very American. But to me, inclusionary means you go to other places to meet and greet those other people and listen and accept them and get to know them, or be okay with if they don't want to get to know you. Because going all the way back to the Around the Coyote, I had some arts groups that were like, screw the Coyote. I don't want to perform there. I'm not going to perform there. I don't like what it does about gentrification. Or screw the Coyote. It's got a bad rep. I don't want to associate with it. So there were groups that I reached out to that didn't want to do it. And a couple of those other groups, I got into the Around the Coyote a couple of years later. Some of them never came.
Yeah. Taking action is, I think, as important as whatever results you get from it. You have to detach yourself from the results and just judge your success by, did I make a real honest effort?
Right.
At inclusion. And then whatever happens, happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then even find out that later on, there might have been mistakes that were made because while you're attempting to be inclusionary, you still came across like a missionary.
Yeah. I'm here to proclaim the good word of the Around the Coyote Festival.
Right. So get in line.
Yeah.
One final tip.
Yeah.
If you are living somewhere that you're comfortable, go for a walk. You meet a lot more people, places, and things by doing that.
Yes.
You get hungry, you're like, oh, look, there's a store there's a restaurant that I've never been to before, but I'm hungry. I'll go in. If you're driving, you shoot right past it.
Yep. You gave me some advice a long time ago when I got a scooter. And
yes.
So for those listening, for a period of time, I had a little, 50cc scooter, and I called it Toots. And
nice.
Thank you. Jonathan had given me the two pieces of great advice. Number one, it is way harder to have a drink and then ride your scooter home than it is to have a drink and drive a car home.
Yeah, that's very, very true.
And the second piece of advice was that I would notice smells.
Yes.
And he was right. I noticed the way things smelled so much differently. And that is just, I think, like, then if you were to extend that to taking walks, yeah, you will definitely notice more of what's around you and the people and the businesses and the opportunities when you can slow down and walk instead of hopping in your car all the time.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's a very fast way to become inclusionary, because you walk through your place and you say hello.
Yep. Oh, that is so cool.
Now I feel like Mr. Rogers. It's a beautiful day in your inclusionary community.
Would you be mine if you want to and you're comfortable?
Right. Yes.
Yes. I love it. Jonathan,
Well, I
thank
think
you
that now
so
that we've
much.
invoked Mr. Rogers, we're done.
Yeah, yeah. We've achieved something great today.
Yes.
Oh, thank you so much. Jonathan, how can people get in touch with you if they want to follow you on your global improv walkabout?
Well, in the future, I'm going to have a website that's going to be at jonathanpittsimprov.com.
Okay.
And in the future, I'm going to have a Facebook page. It'll be like Jonathan Pitts Improv. But in the
Mhm.
meantime, you can just go to my personal page, which is Jonathan Pitts, JONATHANPITTS. And you know it's me because you can see in the profile photo a guy holding a stick and cloth, which is almost representative of going on a walk.
Yes. Oh God, yeah. You know what? We will need to schedule time to do a whole thing about Storybox.
Sure. Great.
Yes. Hey everyone, thank you so much again for listening this week. Remember to share this with a colleague or friend who you think might benefit from the info. And if you'd like to reach me directly, email me, becky@virtualexecutivedirector.com, or follow me and DM me on Instagram, where I am at virtual_exec, or at Becky Brett Caldwell if you like a little more sass in your support every day. Remember, everybody, we shine brighter when we shine together.